When rereading Kenneth Opel's Airborn again, it's hard not to notice and take enjoyment from recognizing the typical tropes and even ideas about the world that exist outside the written story, but may still be in the world of the story. Not everything about the world is spelled out. That would risk a great deal of tedious exposition dumping to the story's detriment. But with knowledge of real-life history, society, and science of technology, much more depth can be inferred that even the author may intend. As an aside, I find both the author and death of the author to be useful in enjoying their work. The meaning you find in a story doesn't have to be limited by the explicit or implicit intentions of the author. At the same time, understanding the author can inform your understanding of the story and the world it takes place in, to better connect to the emotional core and logical consistency of everyone and everything within. Personally, I wouldn't purport to know the author as a person so well, but I can make inference to what kind of world they've created thanks to real-life knowledge. Starting with the characters themselves, we should remember that our heroes, Matt and Kate, are both presumed to be about 15 years old. This is significant because in Matt's profession, not only is he a cabin boy seeing to passengers' needs and accommodations, he also takes high-risk work that even adults would rightly expect greater caution and preparation to undertake. Attaching oneself to an onboard crane to swing over open space to another vessel, attaching only a safety line to swing down the flank of an airship to conduct intensive patching repairs on the airship's skin, in the middle of a lightning storm no less, and jumping straight off the ship onto unprepared ground to help tie down the airship. Each and every single one of the aforementioned activities can be deadly with any simple misstep or if any precaution is overlooked. The fact that a 15-year-old Matt can undertake these tasks without serious opposition means that what today would be considered exceptionally hazardous work for a minor is not really an obstacle for the crew, the airship operators, and the cruise company they work for. This suggests that the owners and operators of industry in this world have no fear of repercussion for the injury or loss of a crew member like 15-year-old Matt, or simply don't have close monitoring for such an occurrence. I believe one can surmise that the world of Airborn is experiencing something of an expanding industrial movement, where the ability to produce goods and make money from which makes the risky employment of a young person acceptable. This is roughly akin to our real-life history's Industrial Revolution in Europe before the turn of the 20th century, where child labor was an acceptable practice for the sake of expanding industrial productivity, even at the frequent cost of said children's health and lives. The children involved in child labor during the Industrial Revolution weren't from all walks of life either. They were invariably the lower classes, just like Matt. This also brings up the interesting caveat of Bruce's introduction to the crew. Bruce is implied to be closer to adult age, around 17 or 18, but otherwise is tasked the same way to the airship's normal and emergency operation as Matt of 15. It is possible that, as the son of notable industrialists, he was given at least some instruction as to protect himself during hazardous work aboard an airship, but we don't actually see it in story, nor is it implied that it might have occurred on board, or even close at hand to the airship itself. It's also possible that, being closer to adult, Bruce is just expected to look out for his own self-preservation, so Bruce can be expected to take on the more hazardous work. The discrepancy between the crew members' ages and their similar hazardous duties on board airship could be resolved by the written fact that, on paper, Matt of 15 is only a cabin boy, and Bruce of 17 is officially junior sailmaker. If no inquiry went beyond the official documentation, there may be no cause for objecting to using child labor when the designated work is only in the passenger cabins. However, we know in story that Matt is allowed to partake in the more hazardous work on board the Aurora, and is willing and eager to do so, given his ambition. If we assume that the miner doing the work of older, more experienced crew would indeed become a liability for the airship operators, then the fact that no risk of repercussion or reassignment or even suspension or expulsion is ever explicitly feared allows us to consider two possibilities. One, that the airship industry regularly employs crew outside their stated roles with less regard to hazard and their health, and that crew or their families have little recourse concerning abuse or negligence. Or two, that Matt is a special case that's regularly enabled by this particular crew to take risks for less explicit reasons, such as sentiment for his late father and fellow crew member. In that case, the crew or even Captain Walken himself are doing Matt a distinct favor in not letting knowledge of his activity reach higher management or his mother, lest they have just cause to ground him, if for nothing else than his own safety. As to the structure and subsequent job security of the crew, there are a distinct set of features that can define how the crew operates in relation to each other and their upper management as well. With a little observation and research, one can find that it doesn't necessarily follow that the crew operating a vessel is strictly permanent for the vessel. Signing on isn't a strictly lifetime deal. Neither would anyone really want working on an airship to be a lifetime deal, even one as wondrous as a cruise liner named Aurora. That's because crew not only likely have lives outside the ship, they also have family, financial, and legal obligations that need time and attention without regard to the profit margin of the ship's operation. Depending on the length of a given voyage, it's advantageous to have a predictable length such that at the end of the job, the crew can use their pay to take care of personal business at home before they consider going again. In the age of sail, for example, the voyages could be so long that by the time the crew returns, it would not necessarily be a quick turnaround time to work on the same ship or even for the similar type of voyage. So the incentive then is to get enough pay for all that time the crew member is away to support their home and family they leave behind before considering another voyage. However, when voyages become shorter, the possible routes easier or more lucrative, or safety more assured, then it's possible to allow a shorter turnaround before going on another voyage, even on the same ship doing the same job. Instead of months away from home, a trip that takes only a few days or weeks can allow for a few days downtime at home before returning to the voyage. And for the Aurora running cruises between distinct destinations for affluent passengers means that scheduling regular downtime for crew members isn't nearly the odyssey it could or used to be. The consideration of choosing to sail on a per-ship or per-voyage basis is of great importance to the crew that's non-commissioned and not uniquely qualified to the vessel's operation. That's where the commissioned officers come in, and theirs is a different circumstance. To run a vessel properly requires crew with distinct skills, expertise, and professional experience. While the more tedious and mundane tasks can be assigned to common folk that may come or go between voyages, running a vessel safely for maximum profit and efficiency demands better incentive for the officers that likely need to be kept around for their knowledge and well-practiced handling of that particular vessel. The special knowledge for the handling of airships for commerce probably came from dedicated education in those very disciplines needed. The crews that come out of those institutions likely came from higher wealth classes that could afford to apply, enroll, and graduate. If we assume the education institutions, like the mentioned Airship Academy, have a close working relationship with the needs of the airship-based industries, the people that graduate to become commissioned officers on airship crews are awarded the necessary credentials to get started in gaining experience, and in time, expertise. Since the expertise of such an education and subsequent training and time to gain proficiency could be substantial, the Airship Academy and the corporations that sponsor its education programs would probably need to offer incentives to keep promising students going on the right path towards making those corporations their wealth on airship operations. We can deduce that with the prestige of the Airship Academy and the seniority of the officers and more specialized crew, there's probably a systemic incentive offered by airship owners and operators for crew to stay on individual airships to keep them proficient and profitable. The officers might be offered better pay, special accommodations for home and family, or even special privileges of authority in their commands among their crews. Special dispensation to authority over the crew may explain the general attitude of some of the officers to younger, less specialized crew members like Matt. As we could see in story, despite the captain's clear favor to Matt, this isn't universal among the officers. At least a couple are quicker to being stern or dismissive of Matt. A higher class upbringing fostering distrust or dismissal of anyone lower class, a higher incentive to be seen as more professional in any given circumstance, and more to lose if they seem less relevant in any way to more junior crew, may explain this behavior, and may indicate that the culture of an airship crew in-universe is not always so meritocratic or egalitarian. There may be incentives outside the actual operation and performance of the airship crew that can motivate stern or condescending attitudes of commissioned officers towards the rest of the crew. If the ownership and operation of an airship is anything like the same for a real-life ship, both present and in the past, then the very structure of the ownership and management can also inform how the crews are treated according to their standing in the organization. When a vessel is operated for commerce, the money and resources for its commissioning, whether by new construction or purchase from another group, comes from investors, who expect profits in return for that vessel's operation, whatever the role. The investors could be government or private persons or organizations that have expectations for the performance of the vessel in its role in the economy. There is a distinct incentive to try and get the most proficient and profitable performance out of the airship for the least cost. Where the crews are concerned, you need people with the special knowledge needed to operate the vessel, and you need others with more general skills to fill out the labor needs. The commissioned officers need to be duly compensated for their education, experience, and their investment therein, while the more general labor may only need to be compensated for their time and energy on the voyage. I suspect the incentive would be to give special rewards and perks to the officers, and the bare minimum necessary to the other crew. And in a world without long-range instant communication of authority, or enforced basic minimums for compensation, the difference could speak to an additional requirement. If the general crew gets undisciplined or disobedient, it's a serious threat to the safe and profitable operation of the vessel, so the officers have to be incentivized to keep order as needed. In our history, that involved strict rules and corporal punishment, at least in the past. Without any tangible guarantees against abuse and due concern for safety in hazardous conditions, the non-commissioned crew may eventually have cause to mutiny and to try and seize control of the vessel for their own sake. The reasons I suspect these incentives are in play are two additional features of the crew and airship in story: the presence of pirates and the singular rifle on board the Aurora. The web of incentives explains the presence of pirates in this world because they likely became pirates because they preferred to use their vessels to help seize wealth and take their chances fighting officers and being pursued by authorities, rather than make a meager, honest living under a real threat of abuse. And the one gun on board the Aurora may very well be a standard issue, accessed only by the officers for the sake of deterring or defeating a mutiny. If we consider the alternative, that the officers and crew were more equal in their origins, investment, and compensation, then pirates would be more likely come from crews committing barratry, which is the seizure of vessel from its rightful owners, the shareholders, denying them profit from its operation. We don't actually know how often mutinies or barrateries occur relative to each other, but either occurrence and the web of incentives that enables them may very well happen quite often, given that pirates are a fixture in universe. While much discussion of larger society, commerce, economics, and politics is, by design, outside the scope of the story, part of the fun of theorizing what may be happening outside the author's written story is the way other interesting stories may play out, either in relation to what we've read, or on their own using the same internal logic we postulate runs in universe. So far, I've made assumptions and drew conclusions about the world of Kenneth Opel's Airborn through the characters' interactions and internally stated knowledge of their world. While I've spoken about the relations of people by class and industry, as well as some byproducts thereof, we could expand our theorizing to include geopolitical matters. As a start, we can take note that despite the fictional names of certain locations, such as Lionsgate City, there are also real-life locations referenced, such as Sydney, Australia, and Paris, France, as well as the Hawaiian island chain, and the cook Vlad is mentioned having a Transylvanian accent. Barring the author's intent to keep the geography and political boundaries of the world similar to our own, but with a completely changed geopolitical history, we can surmise that the history of the world is roughly similar to our own real-life history, at least in broad strokes. As an aside, Lionsgate City has at least 2 real-life references in its name. Lionsgate is a Canadian-American entertainment company, and Lionsgate is the name of the bridge in Vancouver, Canada. We might take these as one and the same referenced in the book. If anything of our real-life history occurred similarly in Opel's written world, at least before airships could come and change the course of history, then we can presume that includes the history of empires, and the concurrent ages of exploration and age of sail as well. Additionally, in story, the development and proliferation of airships is said to be about 50 years by the time Matt and Kate have their adventure. It doesn't help much in figuring out what the rough equivalent date would be relative to our own history, but it may help us hypothesize as to the rough boundaries of the world in relation to how our real-life empires spread in our history. In real life, we did not proliferate airships like in the fiction. We developed heavier-than-air craft that, within 50 years of the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk, went from wood, fabric, and wire constructions barely able to lift off, to nearing supersonic speeds with all-metal construction and high-speed turbine propulsion. By comparison, the airship technology presented in story, fictional elements notwithstanding, is a roughly simplified version of what we had for airships in the 1920s or 30s. While the technology of airships in-universe is really a whole different discussion, we can assume that 50 years of development reaching real-life 20s or 30s level technology puts the beginning of airship development about as early as the mid-19th century. In the mid-19th century, our real-life history, and maybe in this fictional history as well, European-based empires have and continue to seek domination of as many landmasses, indigenous peoples, mineral resources, and routes of trade and power projection as they can. While no mention is made in story of imperial power, their structures, colonies, and competition for dominion, they may yet be going on outside the written story. And there's also a conspicuous absence of another major power that founded and defined itself by defying an empire and creating a new imperial power in the Americas, the United States. If you've just been reading the story and comprehending it at a surface level, you might have only guessed that the only thing alternate about this fictional history is the presence and proliferation of airships. Now you could read the story as an alternate history where Britain's American colonies never managed to gain independence. That would mean that the British, French, and Spanish empires not only managed to keep their holdings in America that they would have given up to America as in our history, but continued their inter-empire competition on the continent up to the time of our story. There's not enough in-story to parse any greater detail than that, however. It does inform us as to the significance of what we do see in-story. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, our heroes, flying on their airship, are accosted by pirates, who, in addition to being heavily armed, are sufficiently threatening, well practiced in their maneuvers, and maintain a colony far away from imperial control. I mentioned earlier what socioeconomic and business structure might help incentivize sailors to become pirates, so if we consider the additional effect of empire, where wealth from labor flows upward to royalty, nobility, and gentry, we can guess there's likely a large underclass of people that may choose a pirate's life for themselves. In our real-life history, the most examined and romanticized history of piracy would be what occurred and was based in the Caribbean Sea and beyond, covering the 17th to the 19th centuries. In this broad definition, pirates came from a variety of sources. These included island settlers, turning to the raiding and pillaging of imperial colonies and convoys for wealth and sustenance, and sailors and privateers employed in war between empires that are left unemployed in peace. If colony settlement is not bringing sustenance or peacetime sailing is not bringing gainful employment, then members of an empire's underclass may very well be incentivized to put their survival and sailing skills to take wealth and resources from the more well-to-do. In the story, the pirates have armaments comprising at least handguns and an airship-mounted cannon. Notwithstanding the question of technical challenges for arming men in airship, this points to at least one possibility for the pirates' presence. The pirates may have been previously employed as military airshipmen helping to fight an imperial war, or former members of the Sky Guard that defected for a chance at wealth, where the prey wouldn't easily or likely fight back. Another possibility is that the pirates were formerly meant to be settlers on their way to a colony to help it grow, or to help found a new colony. If that was the case, since the island they landed on was unknown to the outside world, they may have been sent off course, or chose a destination different and unknown to imperial ambitions. Whether by chance or dramatic defiance, the pirates we see may have their roots in imperial dispossession, one way or another. There's also more to consider concerning the pirates' organization than simply the charisma and ruthless efficiency of their leader, Spearglass. Despite the popular portrayal of pirates being ruled by a dictatorship of one captain, it was far more often the case in real life that pirates had to make their decisions, rules, and authority by more democratic methods. Pirates weren't predicated on leaving themselves open to abuse, so a captain-centered dictatorship would more likely end with the wannabe dictator killed without remorse. To keep everyone from getting into a free-for-all and abandoning their goal of plunder, charters were made specifying rules and covering as many contingencies as could be foreseen and agreed upon, including everything from voting on the structure of leadership and who has what responsibilities on duty, at what times, what they may be permitted to do off-duty, how to resolve disputes, how they may be compensated for keeping watch for targets, and upon successful plunder, what they may be compensated for their effort, and the loss of body parts. What pirates wanted out of their pirating lifestyle was to accost civilians, relieve them of their wealth, and escape without harm to themselves. It so happens that the best ways of achieving these goals was to surprise civilians with such overwhelming firepower that they cannot hope to win by fighting back. In return for not fighting back, it's in the pirates' interest to make quick work of taking the wealth and leaving the civilians unharmed. Leaving aside any sadistic indulgence, the only ways being cruel or violent serve the pirates is to deter civilians from hiding wealth or trying to fight back. Otherwise, if knowledge gets out that the pirates kill everyone they meet, then clearly the best chance for survival is to fight back. That's a danger to the pirates they'd probably rather avoid. Far more important than besting civilians in a fight is to be so terrifying that none dare fight. And for that, witnesses must return safe and sufficiently terrified to spread the pirates' brand, as it were. The greater the notoriety, the more likely pirates can get away with their plundering ways. Up to a point. Less nuanced and more understandable is if pirates become too notorious and cause too much tangible harm. They may get the attention of military forces. In story, this would be the Sky Guard. Under pursuit, the pirates' survival likely rests on the speed of their vessels, the concealment and defenses of their base, and the fear their brand inspires to cow lesser soldiers. When Matt and Kate meet the pirates, try to protect themselves with a ruse, and are discovered, it is with an uncharacteristic resource that the pirate leader Spearglass reveals the deception: intelligence. Not only does Spearglass happen to recognize Matt from his raid on the Aurora, he also knows Kate's attempted deception by his knowledge that the address she provides for contacting her family is false. Under threat of death trap, which Spearglass uses anyway, he coerces out of Kate the real or more believable address with which to send his ransom demand. This suggests that Spearglass gets intelligence from inside polite society as to what wealthy individual or rich cargo is traversing his part of the world. It's not unreasonable to think that if pirates could get knowledge beforehand of what valuable cargo or potential ransom is going where, then they would use it to maximize their plunder. This requires a source in just the right place where they can get the information of interest to the pirates. This same source would also need to be bought, which may not be too hard in a far-flung colony with little oversight, little wealth to go around, and thus easily corruptible to criminal activity. This also points to another interesting possibility. Not only do the pirates have sources of information in lawful society, they also have trade as well. The pirates we see in story live in a remote, uncharted island with resources. While able to support their lives and their pirating, doesn't lend itself to trade in the normal sense. The pirates aren't farming, fishing, or mining for a purpose of export. And while the pirates are making off with valuables from their raid on the Aurora, those valuables themselves can only be used for decoration or traded for the things they need. Not necessarily water, food, or lift gas, such that the island provides, but more likely fuel, materials for airship maintenance, medicine, and intelligence. That means that at least a few people elsewhere know of the pirates' presence, at least somewhere in the Pacific, and regularly conduct business with them. Those unknown benefactors would be supplying the pirates, yet at the same time not drawing the ire of imperial powers. If we consider and accept that this wondrous written world of airship travel is built on a history of longer-lasting empires, continuing their expansion and competition, leading to the spread of notorious air pirates preying on civilian traffic, while hidden among far-flung colonies and supported by anonymous suppliers, then we can further consider the role of the Sky Guard and where the Empire's military priorities lie. In our real history, imperial military power wasn't solely dedicated to directly opposing the military power of rival empires. It also played a great role in maintaining order in their colonial possessions and maintaining the flow of wealth from those colonies to the home countries, and by extension, their royal, noble, and corporate shareholders. The risk came from those pesky locals that don't like being worked hard for someone else's wealth, and may get the funny idea about uniting as one people and movement with one vision of building their nation for their own benefit before the empires. In story, we see precious little indication of colonial attitudes towards their imperial masters, but the presence of the pirates and the Sky Guard may give hints as to the balance of power. We can guess that pirates formed because there was a great enough reward in opposing, and preying on an empire, and a low enough risk of getting caught and punished. It's even easier to do when another empire gives official permission to prey on a rival empire's commerce, such as how privateering works. Otherwise, the risks can increase when empires cooperate to stop piracy, or when privately formed or government-funded pirate hunters come for a bounty. The singular force for anti-piracy operation seen in story is the Sky Guard, whom civilian vessels may call when they're in distress, whether it be in an emergency or more specifically when accosted by pirates. One of the Aurora's crew is murdered for exactly that reason. The only other time the Sky Guard comes into the story is in the resolution where they backtrack the Aurora's path to find and subdue the pirates, taking their villagers into custody. They also provide the monetary reward that allows Matt to leave the Aurora and pursue higher education. We may notice that the Sky Guard subduing the pirates, end of the story notwithstanding, is not nearly presented as noteworthy of risk or drama as you might expect for a band led by so notorious a figure as Spearglass. Supposing that their efficiency was based solely on Spearglass's leadership is technically possible, but as it wasn't explicitly written as a dictatorial relationship, there's no reason to think that the other pirates weren't as cunning, deadly, and motivated as Spearglass himself. Spearglass likely commanded through mutual respect and earned trust more than forceful coercion. The pirates, therefore, may very well have put their best minds and best foot forward to defending themselves and their colony from the Sky Guard, inspired by their departed leader. The lack of drama in the Sky Guard's operation speaks to the likelihood that the pirates were simply surprised, outgunned, outsupplied, outmaneuvered, or even outfought if it came down to it. Since the pirate colony's island was in range of the Sky Guard, and the units that captured the pirates would have had all they needed to subdue them without noteworthy setback, there may be a strange dichotomy at work between the long notorious career of the pirates and the swift victory of the Sky Guard. One possibility is that not all of the Sky Guard units are created equal, that there are subdivisions in the Sky Guard's role of maintaining order and responding to emergencies. One division may act like the real-life Coast Guard, that not only responds to vessels in distress, but also intercepts criminals on the water. Another division may act to quell civil unrest and mutiny on vessels. And yet another may respond to threats like pirates or privateers, demanding greater weapons and training than a majority of the other divisions, perhaps akin to real-life SWAT police. This would explain how a Sky Guard unit may be formidable enough to successfully subdue a band of notorious pirates without notable setback. What it doesn't explain is how the Sky Guard somehow neglected to seek out the pirates before they could threaten civilians, such as the cruise liner Aurora. Another possibility is that the Sky Guard is only supplied and trained enough to respond in certain conditions. They may only mobilize their resources when distress or threats are confirmed by civilians, but maybe don't have the resources for a campaign of suppressing pirates or other criminals on their own initiative. That would suggest a lack of resources that could only be alleviated if the potential victim is rich and influential enough to sponsor their quicker mobilization and needed supply. If you weren't important enough, your plight could be neglected, and not every airship, operator, or crew is as prestigious as Lunardi Cruise Line's flagship Aurora. If resources are not allocated to the Sky Guard, such that they have to pick and choose who to aid in an emergency, then that may suggest that their station, especially in farther-flung colonies, like those isolated in the Pacific, are routinely neglected in favor of law and order being guaranteed in closer colonies, or the home country itself. That would explain how pirates could prey on civilian vessels flying unprotected far from any important ports, using intelligence on the valuable cargo likely provided from the same sources as the Sky Guard, and using the danger of the Sisyphus Triangle to cover for airship disappearances that may really be due to pirate activity. If the resources of the colonies were important, there'd be little doubt that significant military force would be allocated to ensure the safe passage of the material wealth going home, and valuable commercial goods going out. If the alternative is true, that colonies in this fictional age of empire are neglected the aforementioned security, this also suggests different possibilities. One possibility is that military force in the Empire's colonies was so successful that the populations capitulated in totality, into serving the Empire's wealth and assimilating into the culture, in which case lesser military force would be needed to maintain law and order. The more likely alternative, in my opinion, is that the wealth of the colonies is not so great as to justify the expenditure of military power and projection, especially compared to the threat of rival empires close at hand. The Sky Guard then operating at the Empire's fringes would be an afterthought. There may very well be more pirates and other criminals operating under the attention of this world's empires, and more vessels like Aurora and their crews being imperiled than even the characters may be aware of. And what's perilous for the characters is ripe for new storytelling for us, because that's plenty for a world of adventure right there.